He's sitting in the back row right now. When you see him, everything you thought about power and privilege gets shattered. Watch what happens when the invisible man refuses to stay hidden. The ballroom fell silent. Not anticipation. Terror. The kind that comes the instant before a truth becomes impossible to deny. Marcus sat in the back, third row from the exit, metal folding chair, hands folded across his lap. The kind of seat you choose when you don't expect to be remembered. When staying invisible feels like survival. Around him, three-piece suits cut from Italian fabric and diamond earrings reflecting light like fractured stars. Champagne flutes catching the crystalline cascade of chandeliers that cost more than his entire apartment building. The air itself smelled expensive, bergamot and old money, and the particular perfume of people who'd never had to wonder where their next meal was coming from. But Marcus wore what he always wore, the charcoal blazer his daughter Zara had picked out 2 years ago at a thrift store on a Saturday afternoon. She'd held it up to his shoulders with the intensity of an art appraiser discovering a masterpiece. He'd pressed it so carefully the creases could cut glass. Every line was exact. Every fold was deliberate. In a room full of people broadcasting their importance through designer labels, Marcus's importance was invisible, hidden in the precision of his care, the discipline of his attention to detail. He wasn't supposed to be here. The invitation had come through a clerical error. His name on a list meant for someone else. Someone with the right credentials, the right zip code, the right skin tone in these circles. Someone the system had already decided mattered. But when Zara saw the cream-colored envelope on the kitchen table 3 weeks earlier, her eyes had transformed into something luminous. She was 12. Still young enough to believe that fancy things meant you mattered. Still young enough to believe that her father's presence at such an event was validation of something true about him, something the world had been refusing to acknowledge. "Dad, you're going to the Templeton Gala?" Her voice carried that specific frequency of hope that single parents learn to recognize. The sound of a child reaching for normal, for the life she saw in movies and television shows where fathers had validated importance, where their parents belonged in rooms with crystal and candlelight. She'd set the invitation down on the kitchen counter and looked at him with an expression that said, "Finally." He'd almost thrown it away, almost crumpled it into the trash and told her that he'd received it by mistake. That he wasn't the Marcus Williams they were looking for. That there was probably someone more important, someone who actually belonged. Someone whose presence wouldn't highlight, by contrast, exactly how far beneath these people he actually was. Instead, he'd said yes. Now, as the CEO of Templeton Industries took the stage, Richard Ashford, silver-haired and carved from old money, Marcus felt the weight of that decision pressing into his chest. Ashford moved with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his right to any space. His smile was all teeth. When he raised his hand, the light caught his Rolex. $20,000 on his wrist. That was Marcus's annual salary. "Tonight," Ashford's voice boomed through the auditorium, resonating off marble like thunder. "We celebrate innovation. We celebrate vision. We celebrate the men and women who understand that true power comes from understanding people, really understanding them." The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so bitter. 3 weeks earlier, the same day Zara had held up that blazer in the thrift store, Marcus had stood in that same building, not in a ballroom with its luxury and light, in a basement server room, dark and humming with machine breath. The air was cold, maintained at precisely 68 degrees for the equipment's benefit, not the humans who worked there. He'd been there for 6 months, the invisible maintenance technician, the man nobody made eye contact with in hallways, the one who kept the entire company alive while executives upstairs took credit for his work. The basement was his kingdom and his prison. Rows of servers hummed in their racks, lights blinking in patterns only he understood. He'd spent nights down there, fingers moving across keyboards with fluency that came from knowing these machines better than most people knew themselves, solving problems that briefly made him feel visible, like the brilliant person his daughter believed he was. Zara had been sick that week. Fever that wouldn't break, antibiotics that tasted like pennies according to her complaints, a pediatrician's bill of $347. He'd called in to say he'd be late. His supervisor, Jennifer, who wore her contempt like a second skin, who had the particular arrogance of people promoted beyond their actual competence, had barely acknowledged his request. He could picture her, feed up on expensive furniture, deciding his child's illness was less important than corporate presentation metrics. "We've got a presentation to the board in 2 hours," she'd said, her voice carrying that specific tone reserved for people she didn't consider her equals. "The entire network architecture needs to be optimized. Can you fix it or not? Can you fix it? Not will you try, not would you be willing. Can you fix it?" As if it was already an established fact that he could, that it was just a matter of whether he would. He could. He always could. The systems that had been crashing inexplicably for weeks, the ones making the company lose millions in productivity and credibility, had been corroded by basic negligence and corporate shortcuts. Security protocols that hadn't been updated in 3 years. Architecture built for growth that never came, never adapted. Code written by people who'd been allowed to fail upward. He'd seen the problem immediately, the way a musician hears a wrong note in a symphony. Vulnerabilities stacked like blocks, each waiting for the wrong pressure to topple everything. It was beautiful in its clarity, something broken that only he could see. Marcus had reconfigured the entire back-end infrastructure in 90 minutes, redesigned it, optimized it, built redundancies and fail-safes that would protect it for years, from the basement, without credit, without acknowledgement, without Jennifer even understanding what he'd done, much less how he'd done it. He'd sent the update through at 6:47 p.m. By 7:15 p.m. every system was running at optimal capacity. By 8:00 p.m. the presentation had gone forward. By 8:30 p.m. the board had been amazed. By 9:00 p.m. Jennifer had gotten a promotion and a bonus. The company stock jumped 4 points. The CEO had personally commended her vision for technical leadership. Meanwhile, Marcus had gone home to find Zara asleep on the couch, her small body burning up with fever. He'd spent the rest of the night refreshing the temperature reading on her forehead every 5 minutes, watching her small body finally relax into genuine sleep at 3 a.m., his hand resting gently on her shoulder, wondering if she would remember this, if she would remember that her father had saved a company while she was sick, and nobody had known, and nobody would ever know. Now, watching Ashford command the stage with the casual authority of someone who'd never questioned his own importance, someone for whom doors had always opened and paths had always been cleared, Marcus felt something crystallize inside him. Not anger exactly, clarity. The kind that comes when you finally understand that the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, working perfectly, just not for people like him, not for the invisible people solving invisible problems in invisible rooms. "Our latest acquisition," Ashford continued, his voice dripping with satisfaction, with the certainty of a man who'd never had to doubt his own narrative, represents the most sophisticated technological infrastructure overhaul in the history of our sector. We've integrated AI-driven optimization protocols that our competitors won't understand for another 5 years. This is what separates Templeton from every other company in this room. This is innovation. This is vision. Marcus's jaw tightened, his hands pressed flat against his thighs. He recognized those protocols. Not because Ashford had described them accurately. He described them wrong, actually. Catastrophically wrong, missing the elegant complexity of the underlying architecture, the beautiful redundancy that made the system unbreakable, but because Marcus had designed them, had spent 3 months rebuilding a system nobody else could fix, had stayed until midnight most nights eating lunch at his desk, typing code while his daughter was asleep at home, all while making $48,000 a year, all while being treated as maintenance, as infrastructure, as invisible. The camera panned across the audience, powerful people nodding in recognition, powerful people believing a lie they would repeat at dinner parties for months. Powerful people who would reference this moment as proof of Ashford's genius, as evidence that he deserved to lead them, as justification for whatever he decided next. Then the camera caught him, just for a second. Marcus in the back row, his face caught in the moment before he could school his expression. Not anger, not bitterness, recognition. The terrible recognition of someone who'd finally understood the totality of his own invisibility, who'd finally grasped that excellence didn't matter, that brilliance didn't matter, that you could change the world and the world would give the credit to someone else. The terrible, crystalline recognition that the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly the way it was designed to work. Zara was at home with her grandmother. She'd wanted to come, had asked 3 times with the specific persistence of children who sense their parents' reluctance and interpret it as a challenge. But he'd told her the event would be boring, a lie. She would have come in her best dress, the one with the small tear near the hem that she refused to let him fix because it makes it look real, Dad. She would have sat beside him and believed in that wholehearted way children have that her father was important enough to be in a room full of important people. The thought made something in his chest fracture. Ashford's speech continued. More platitudes, more mythology about innovation and vision and the importance of thinking differently. All of it built on the backs of people like Marcus, people whose thinking had already been different, already been innovative, already been exactly what the company needed. People who'd been rendered invisible by the simple fact of their appearance and their zip code. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the board members, a woman Marcus had seen before in the basement actually once or twice, moving through the server room with purpose instead of panic, stood up. Her name was Dr. Sarah Chen, and she'd always been one of the few executives who acknowledged his presence with a nod, sometimes even a greeting. The kind of human gesture that meant everything when you were used to being treated like equipment. "Richard," she said, her voice cutting through his speech like a blade. "I need to ask you something." The room shifted. There was blood in the water now. "The infrastructure protocols you're presenting," Chen continued, moving to the center of the ballroom, her footsteps echoing off marble. "Who designed them?" Ashford's smile didn't falter, but his shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "Our in-house technical team, the best in the industry." "Specifically," Chen pressed, "who?" A pause, long enough to matter. "Jennifer Paulson leads that division." "Jennifer," Chen said quietly, her voice carrying across the entire ballroom. "Who designed the back end?" Jennifer stood, her face beginning to flush. "We have a team. It's collaborative work." "That's not what I asked," Chen said. She turned to Ashford. "I know who designed them. I've been reviewing the code architecture. I have a PhD in systems engineering. And what's in that code, the elegance, the innovation, the sheer problem solving, that's not Jennifer's work. That's not even close to Jennifer's work." The silence this time was different, dangerous, the kind of silence that precedes transformation. "Who?" Chen said, looking directly at Marcus in the back of the room. "Is that?" Everything stopped. A champagne flute hit the marble floor. Marcus felt 300 eyes turning toward him. He could have stayed silent, could have remained invisible, what he'd been trained to do his entire life. Instead, he stood. The sound of his chair scraping marble echoed like a gunshot. "Marcus Williams," he said. His voice was steady, not loud, just true. "I designed the infrastructure. I rebuilt your entire network architecture. I identified every vulnerability in your system. I did it for $48,000 a year while maintaining basement servers nobody else wanted to touch." Ashford's face was transforming in real time. The practiced expression of a CEO was cracking, revealing something beneath it. Panic, maybe, or the first stages of understanding what happens when the invisible suddenly become visible. "You don't have the credentials," Ashford began. "I have the code," Marcus said simply. "I can walk you through every line. I can explain the quantum optimization algorithm I developed to solve your bandwidth bottleneck. I can show you the 3 redundancy protocols I built that nobody else in your company understood because they were too busy taking credit for my work." Dr. Chen was smiling, not unkindly, but with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting to expose this particular lie. "I ran the code through independent verification," Chen said. "Our team analyzed every component. It's revolutionary. The kind of work that should be in peer-reviewed journals, the kind that gets people hired at MIT. She looked at Ashford. "And you didn't even know the man's name." The chaos that followed was almost beautiful in its precision. Phones came out. Calls were made. Within 45 minutes, the technical team was being audited. Within 90 minutes, 3 executives had resigned. By midnight, when Marcus finally left the building, his entire life had reorganized itself into before and after. But the moment that mattered most came later. He got home at 1 a.m. to find Zara asleep on the couch, her head in her grandmother's lap. She'd waited up despite his instructions, having convinced her grandmother to allow it. Her grandmother was asleep too, exhausted from managing a child's hope. When he woke Zara gently, brushing her hair back, She looked up with eyes heavy from sleep. "How was it?" she asked. He could have given her the simple version. Could have said it was fine, boring, nothing to worry about. He could have protected her from the knowledge of his invisibility, the way parents do, the way he'd been trying to do her whole life. Instead, he knelt down beside the couch. "Baby," he said, "I need to tell you something about your dad." She sat up then, suddenly alert in that way children are when they sense importance. He told her everything, not the bitterness, never the bitterness, but the truth. How he'd solved a problem that nobody else could solve. How he'd been invisible for a long time. How sometimes the world doesn't see you until you force it to stop and really look. "But they see you now?" Zara asked, with the specific clarity of a child who understood exactly what was at stake. "Now they do," Marcus said. Within 2 weeks, he'd been offered the position of Chief Technology Officer. Not because Ashford wanted to give it to him, because Dr. Chen had made it clear that if Templeton didn't recognize his value, 12 other companies were waiting to steal him away. Because the code didn't lie. Because innovation can't stay invisible forever. The salary was $340,000 a year. The real compensation was different. It was the morning Zara understood her father wasn't invisible. That brilliance doesn't care what zip code you're from. It was Ashford's apology delivered through an assistant. It was the board restructuring. It was the others who came forward. 3 women and 4 men whose innovations had been stolen and misattributed, finally ready to speak because Marcus had gone first. It was the settlement check that could buy a house in a better neighborhood, better schools, a room of her own for Zara, pipes that wouldn't freeze in winter. But the most important moment came 6 months later. Zara's school was having a career day. Parents came in to talk about their jobs. When Marcus arrived at her classroom, he found 35 second graders sitting cross-legged on a carpet, waiting to hear from the chief technology officer of a major corporation. Zara was sitting in the front row. She wasn't looking at him, not yet, but he could see her shoulders straighten, see the way she was holding her breath. He knelt on the carpet, leveling his eyes with theirs. "I want to tell you something," he said. "When I was your age, nobody thought I would be here. Nobody thought I would do anything important. I was invisible, and for a very long time, I believed them." The children watched with the intensity only children possess. They hadn't learned yet how to fake attention. "But I had one person who believed in me," he said, looking at Zara in the front row. She was crying now, silently. "One person who made me believe that I mattered. And because of that, I kept going. I kept solving problems. And eventually the world had to see me." He paused. "You are not invisible," he said. "You are brilliant. You are capable. And nobody gets to tell you different." Zara was sobbing now, not from sadness, but from the specific relief that comes when you finally understand that your faith in someone wasn't misplaced. That the quiet man who packed your lunch and helped with your homework and believed in you when nobody else did, he was exactly as important as you always thought he was. After the presentation, when all the other parents had left and the teacher was packing up materials, Marcus stayed in the classroom. He held his daughter while she cried, and he didn't tell her it was okay. It hadn't been okay. It was okay now, maybe. But the years of invisibility, the years of being treated as less than, the years of knowing you were solving problems nobody else could solve and still being paid less than the people stealing your credit, that wasn't okay, and it never would be. But she was going to grow up understanding something he'd learned too late. Your value isn't determined by the people who fail to see it. The notification came through his phone at 2 a.m. 6 months after that. An email from a recruiter at Google, then one from Apple, then one from 3 different venture capital firms wanting to fund a startup he was considering launching. But he didn't respond to any of them immediately. Instead, he went to Zara's room. She was asleep, 13 now, growing into the person she was going to become. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her breathe. The world had finally seen him, but more importantly, she had always seen him, and that was worth more than all the money, all the titles, all the recognition he could ever receive. He closed the door quietly and went to his own room. Tomorrow he would change the world again, this time on his own terms. But tonight, he was just a father who'd finally stopped being invisible to himself. The real victory hadn't come at the gala. It had come in that basement, when a man chose to solve an impossible problem not for credit, but because excellence requires nothing less than your full attention. Everything else is just the world catching up. Months passed. The story circulated through word of mouth. A black man, invisible in his company, whose innovation had saved millions. It resonated. Everyone knows someone like Marcus. Everyone has felt invisible. The media picked it up eventually. Forbes, CNBC. But Marcus didn't change. He still made Zara's lunch, still helped with homework, still wore the same charcoal blazer. He hired 3 people from his old neighborhood, brilliant minds the system had trained to believe they weren't good enough. He created a fellowship program. He spoke at schools in districts nobody cared about. You are not invisible. Stanford invited him in year 2, Harvard after that. MIT. Every university wanted him. Not because he was a good speaker, but because he represented what people wanted to believe. The system could be broken. Visibility was possible. Brilliance would eventually be recognized. Zara watched her father transform the world and understood what he'd been teaching her all along. The only invisible person is someone who's given up. On the 5th anniversary of the gala, Templeton restructured its leadership. Marcus became Chief Innovation Officer, not as a consolation prize. He'd been offered better positions elsewhere, but because he'd come home to finish what he'd started. Because invisible people still worked in that basement. He walked into that building on his first day as Chief Innovation Officer and went directly to the basement. The server room was unchanged, the same white noise of machines keeping everything alive. He stood in the center of it, breathing in the familiar hum, and thought about the man who'd sat in the back of that ballroom 6 months earlier, waiting to be forgotten. That version of him had no idea invisibility was temporary, that silence could be broken, that one person, one daughter, one executive who chose to see could change everything. He walked upstairs. Dr. Chen was waiting in a corner office that would soon be his. "Ready?" she asked. "For what?" Marcus replied. "To make sure nobody sits in the back ever again," she said. He looked out the window at the city sprawled below, millions of people invisible to each other, most doing extraordinary things and receiving no recognition. He thought about Zara, about the lunch he'd packed, about dinner conversations where she would tell him something brilliant and he would listen, really listen, and she would feel visible. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." The window reflected his face back at him, a black man in a charcoal blazer, CEO now, but still just a father. Still just someone who'd decided to solve an impossible problem, not for credit, but because excellence requires nothing less than your full attention. The announcement of his promotion came through the company channels at noon. By 3 p.m., his inbox had received over 2,000 messages. Former employees sharing their own stories of invisible brilliance. People from his neighborhood sending congratulations. Zara texting him a single message. "I always knew you were amazing. Love you, Dad." He didn't respond immediately. He just looked at that message for a long moment, understanding finally that the entire journey, from basement to ballroom to boardroom, had never been about proving anything to the world. It had always been about a daughter watching her father refuse to stay invisible. Everything else was just the universe rearranging itself to acknowledge what she'd always known.